Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. It's especially an honor to be speaking at the Muhsen dinner. When I was asked to speak at this dinner, I felt like maybe I wasn't the right person. I felt like maybe I didn't know enough to speak at a dinner about accessibility for people with disabilities. And then I thought about who my heroes were. I thought about my own life experience, and I thought maybe I had something to share. So I want to share one experience I've had, and this is just a brief glimpse that I had into a world that I was unaware of before. And it started on a sunny day when we were vacationing in Beijing, in China. And we were crossing the street very foolishly. And I say foolishly because we really shouldn't have crossed that street. It was a highway, but we were desperate to try to find a taxi, and we thought it would be easier on the other side of the street. Anyway, in crossing the street, my son was hit by a car. And it's only by the grace of God that he is alive today. But when he was hit by this car, he broke his leg, and he was in a wheelchair for 6 months. So in this brief time, I got to experience what it was like to not have accessibility. We didn't actually live in the United States at the time. We lived in the Middle East, where accessibility was very difficult, even at his own school. He wasn't able to go to the bathroom. I mean, he was completely dependent on his wheelchair for these months, and the difficulty and the way that people just didn't account for a person with a wheelchair in any place we went. I had to think about how to get him into a movie theater, into a museum, to school and back. And that brief period, I'm in no way comparing that experience to anything that someone has to endure for their whole life, at least gave me a glimpse into the importance of accessibility. But the work of Muhsen goes way beyond that, to something actually much more profound, much more needed, which is accessibility to the house of Allah, accessibility to knowledge of Allah. And I was at a conference about a year ago, and it was a very interesting talk. So it was a TED conference. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but TED Talks, I'm sure most people have heard of them. This was a TED Talk about creating toys that are accessible to people with disabilities, and creating them in all of these different ways so that anyone can enjoy and learn from this toy. And what it made me think of in that moment is how Allah gave us the salah in a way that it was accessible to every human being. You can perform the salah even if the only thing you can move is your eyes. You can perform the salah, and someone actually pointed this out, that there is movement and there is auditory. So if you can only see and you can't hear, you can follow along with the salah. And if you can only hear but you can't see, you can follow along with the salah. There is accessibility built into our faith, especially in the things that are so fundamental to the connection with Allah. And what Muhsen is doing is bringing that to our masajid. It is such important work. I know it is after the fundraiser, but this is everything that I've been moved to say by listening to the way that people have been sharing today. I was so moved by the three speakers that spoke in the very beginning. Sumaya talked about seeing with our hearts. She talked about basira. And so often we mistake seeing for actually seeing. And the true sight in our faith is actually something you do with your heart, not something you do with your eyes. Sarah reminded us how to actually listen, and the beauty of her words, of expressing gratitude for being deaf because she learned how to truly listen. A reminder to all of us about listening to even the voices that, as Sheikh Omar reminded us, we could walk away from, perhaps, technically, in our society. And I was especially moved by Samia, the way she spoke about her brother, correcting the misconception of a person with disability in your family being a burden, reminding us truly what a blessing is. And then I realized that one of my greatest heroes, a man that we buried last year, a man that I had the honor of speaking at his funeral, someone that has inspired millions and billions of people around the world, that has inspired generations, the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, was a man with a disability. And I want to share some of my favorite stories from this great man's life in an effort to inspire all of us. You know, when he was growing up, his greatest, from a very young age, sometimes 12, 13, 14 years old, his greatest dream was to become the heavyweight champion of the world. He set his goal at such a young age to do this. He said he's going to go to the Olympics, he's going to win the gold medal, and then he's going to be the heavyweight champion of the world. This is what he's been saying since he was a child. And he did exactly that. He went and he got the gold medal. And then when he was going to fight for the heavyweight champion of the world, the heavyweight championship of the world, the media was not even discussing if he would win or lose, but simply lose by how much. The bets were he was going to lose, in terms of the odds, when all of these things have odds and people bet on these fights, the odd against him was 7-1. So the only thing they were talking about, but he was not if he would lose or win, but lose by how much. And so when he was fighting Sonny Liston, he surprised everyone in the first couple of rounds because he was doing a lot better than they thought. But then something happened. Sonny Liston had something on his glove that some people actually think was done on purpose. And it was ointment that he used on his wounds, but it was also on his glove. And when he punched Ali in the eye, it blinded him. And many people who had fought Sonny Liston experienced the same thing. They were actually blinded by something on his glove. Now, Sonny Liston was a very tough guy. Some people, there were many allegations that he had connections to the mob. This was not an easy fight. And so the burning and the blindness of this incredible pain was so horrible that this fight that he had been dreaming of his whole life, he actually wanted to quit. He wanted to stop, and he begged his trainer to cut his gloves, and his trainer wouldn't. He said, keep going. And so somehow he got through this next round almost blind. But then look what happened. The sweat, listen to what happened. This is so profound. The sweat and tears from that perseverance through that round cleared his eyes. The sweat and tears from that round cleared his eyes, and then a clear-eyed Ali knocked out Sonny Liston and became the heavyweight champion of the world. At that time, the youngest in history. SubhanAllah. Immediately after, the next day at the press conference, he announced that he was a Muslim and that his name was Muhammad Ali. It is such a life lesson in terms of his perseverance. And that same spirit of perseverance he took throughout his life. If you study Ali's life, he made more of a difference after he retired. He made more of a difference after his disability started to develop than before. Study his life and that's what you will see, because that same spirit of perseverance and principle was something that he carried out throughout his life. And then he was willing to give it all up. After working so hard for the title, he was willing to give it all up twice. The first time, many people don't know that he was actually told that unless he denounced his faith, he would no longer be able to fight. And this happened very early on, and it wasn't a public thing. And you know what he did? He said, I'd walk away right now. He was willing to walk away from a career that was earning him millions of dollars after growing up in poverty and having this as his dream his entire life, for a faith that he would not compromise on. To the point where it was his sponsors that came back to him and invited him back. He stood with principle, and every time it was the people who wanted him to compromise that it would eventually come back to him. He would never move from his place of principle. And when he avoided going to an unjust war, even though, this is very important, as a celebrity athlete, he would actually never have had to fight. And he knew that. It was the principle of engaging in a war that he fundamentally disagreed with. So he avoided going to war and paid the ultimate price of losing his title and losing his license to fight. Losing his license to fight meant that he could no longer earn a living. And this case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where it was overturned and he was exonerated. And this is incredibly important. When you go to Louisville, it's like Muhammad Ali land. I had never been to Louisville until the funeral, and it was his picture everywhere. I remember this one place in particular, a huge banner, Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time. And I did some research on this club that this banner was on, and it was a club that had been sued for racial discrimination. It was a club that he would not have actually been allowed into, but now was honoring him. Louisville had actually voted during this period to strip him of his, quote, Louisville citizenship, which makes no sense. But the city council had actually done that. And on that day, they were honoring him as their greatest citizen. Because he never changed. His principle was set, but people then changed to come back to where he was. And that's exactly the spirit he took until the day he died. And I want to close by saying this. Sheikh Omar mentioned that our example was a rahmah to all the world. This idea of being a compassion, an act of mercy to all the world is something that if we claim to follow the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, have to make our personal mission. How can each one of us truly be a shining light of compassion to all the worlds? This is our calling. This is our responsibility, if it is true that we consider the Prophet ﷺ our example. How can we extend our compassion footprint? How can we be a light of compassion to everyone we connect to? And I'll close by saying that this organization gives us an opportunity to make an investment that allows this light to shine in so many different ways. This organization gives accessibility to the house of Allah, to the programs that teach people about Allah and His Prophet. This organization allows us to support and to live this value of being a rahmah to all the worlds. Thank you.